This vaccine is a Billionaire suddenly develops a baby bump in his mouth is implanted by Deco's toes. Like, wow, Deco toes is almost a 800 subs. Wow. The link to the video will be the description below. Go and check them out. So let's into this vaccine in 3, 2, 1. And all capable go to Deco toes. Go and subscribe to them. Up them to the to 800 subs. So let's into this vaccine in 3, 2, 1.
Richard Collins was the kind of man whose life looked untouchable.
Really?
Billionaire, philanthropist, and the face of American innovation. He was admired, envied, and
Yeah.
followed everywhere he went. But the headlines that would soon surround him were unlike anything the world had ever seen.
Really?
Because Richard, a man in his late 40s, suddenly began showing signs of pregnancy. His wife
Really?
wasn't expecting a child. Yet Richard's stomach was swelling, his body was changing, and his doctors were left stunned,
Yeah.
unable to explain how a man could possibly be carrying life inside him. It
Yeah.
started innocently. Richard felt bloated after meals, his tailored suits fitting a little too snug. He
Really?
brushed it off as stress, maybe the side effect of too many late-night business dinners.
Really?
But weeks passed, and the tightness in his abdomen didn't go away. Instead, it grew firmer. His stomach rounded out, not like weight gain, but like something pushing outward. At first, he told no one, not even his wife, Catherine. He hid it under loose shirts, convincing himself it was temporary. But then came the nausea. Every morning, without fail, he ran to the bathroom, retching until his throat burned. Catherine finally noticed the change and demanded he see a doctor. The first doctor believed it was digestive trouble, maybe a tumor pressing on his stomach. But when Richard went for imaging scans, the technician froze. On the screen, nestled within his abdominal cavity, was a structure no one could have predicted: a sac, round and fluid-filled, with tissue patterns eerily similar to that of a gestational sac. Richard laughed nervously when the doctor explained. "That's impossible," he said. "I'm a man." But the blood work made it harder to dismiss. His body was producing hormones usually seen in pregnancy. HCG,
Really?
the pregnancy hormone, appeared in his results. Catherine stared at the test reports with disbelief. "Are you saying my husband is pregnant?" she whispered.
Yeah.
The hospital, terrified of leaks, kept the results hidden from the press. Yet whispers began to circulate within the medical community. More tests followed.
Really?
Specialists from around the country were flown in. Some suggested it was a rare tumor mimicking pregnancy symptoms. Others thought it could be a parasitic growth. But nothing explained the presence of a sac that was growing week after week, alongside rising hormone levels that mirrored a natural pregnancy. Richard's health began to deteriorate. He grew irritable, emotional, and developed cravings for unusual foods. At night, he tossed and turned, his hands instinctively resting on his swelling stomach. Catherine tried to stay supportive, but the sight of her powerful, confident husband turning fragile, almost maternal, unsettled her deeply. One evening, during a particularly painful episode of cramping, Richard was rushed to the emergency room. Doctors conducted another scan, and this time, they saw something shocking. Inside the sac was movement. Not random tissue growth, not fluid, but something forming, something alive. Desperate for answers, Catherine confronted Richard. She demanded to know if he had hidden anything about his health, any experiments, or secret treatments. At first, he denied everything. But when pressed harder, Richard finally broke down and confessed to something that changed the entire story. A few months back, Richard had secretly funded a radical biotechnology project. The company was experimenting with artificial womb technology,
Yeah.
lab-grown tissue capable of sustaining embryos outside the female body. While the research had begun as a solution for premature babies, it had shifted towards something more controversial: enabling men or women without wombs to carry life. Richard hadn't
Really?
just been the financier. He had volunteered as a subject. In a private clinic overseas, surgeons had implanted artificial uterine tissue, grown from stem cells, into his abdominal cavity. The trial was
Yeah.
meant to test only whether the tissue would survive in a male body. Nothing more. During the procedure, part of the experiment involved creating eggs from Richard's own stem cells. Those eggs were fertilized in a lab, but the results were disappointing. Some
Really?
embryos were stored for further study, others destroyed. One embryo had been placed inside the artificial tissue to test implantation, but it showed no signs of growth. After 2 weeks, doctors declared the experiment a failure. They told Richard it hadn't worked. He was discharged, and the project quietly moved on. But nature
Really?
had another plan. The
Yeah.
embryo that everyone believed was dead wasn't gone at all. It had clung to life inside Richard's body, hidden and silent. For months, it lay dormant, undetectable, giving no signs of existence. Even Richard had no idea. Now, as his body
Really?
swelled and pregnancy hormones surged in
Yeah.
his blood, the truth was undeniable. The embryo had
Really?
awakened, growing in secret, until his
Yeah.
body itself began revealing what science had overlooked. Catherine was horrified. The life forming inside her husband wasn't the result of love, nor of chance. It was the ghost of an experiment thought to have failed. And it was their
Yes.
child. Now the medical team faced a terrifying challenge. Richard's body was changing, but it was not built for pregnancy. His organs were under strain, his blood pressure climbing dangerously. Surgeons debated whether to remove the sac immediately or allow it to develop. Removing it too early could kill the life inside. Waiting
But
too
yeah.
long could kill Richard. But
Yeah.
Richard
I
refused
see that too.
termination. For him, this was no longer a mistake. It was a miracle. If I survive this, he told his doctors, then humanity will know men can carry life too. Catherine begged him to reconsider, but
Yeah.
Richard was stubborn. The billionaire who once chased innovation now chased immortality through fatherhood and motherhood at the same time. By the 6th month, Richard could no longer hide. His stomach resembled that of a pregnant woman. He experienced cramps, swelling in his ankles, and bouts of exhaustion so severe he fainted twice during meetings.
Really?
His security team worked overtime to keep paparazzi from snapping photos. But inside hospital walls, his condition was a spectacle. Doctors and geneticists huddled daily, fascinated and terrified. Then, one night, Richard collapsed in his study. He was rushed into surgery. Catherine, her hands shaking, signed consent forms she barely understood. The doctors had no choice. If they delayed, Richard would not survive the pressure on his organs. In the operating room, surgeons cut into Richard's abdomen carefully. What they found was something no medical textbook had ever prepared them for. The artificial uterine tissue had grown stronger than expected, creating a protective cocoon around the developing fetus. When they opened it, they pulled out a tiny infant, premature and fragile, but alive. Richard's own child, created from his artificially formed egg and fertilized sperm, had come into the world. But science had not yet perfected the process. The baby's genetic structure was unstable, carrying fragments of damaged DNA from the experimental editing. Despite doctors' desperate efforts, the newborn lived only a few hours. When Richard woke from surgery and Catherine told him the truth, he wept in silence. For the first time in his
Oh.
life, money, power, and influence had meant nothing. He had reached for the impossible and touched it, only to have it slip away. Richard eventually
Oh.
recovered, though his body was left scarred from the experiment. The artificial womb tissue was removed, and doctors swore to secrecy. The story never reached the media, buried by lawyers and non-disclosure agreements. To the outside world, Richard had taken a sabbatical for health reasons. Only Catherine and a handful of doctors knew what really happened. Yet
Yeah.
whispers of the billionaire who carried a child traveled quietly through medical halls. Some saw it as a tragedy, others as the first step into a future where men could bear children.
Yeah.
Richard himself remained haunted. Sometimes he sat alone in the nursery Catherine had once designed for their unborn children, staring at the empty crib. He would place his hand on the scar across his stomach and whisper, "For a moment, I was both father and mother." The story of Richard Collins became a cautionary tale among the doctors who knew it. Science had reached too far, too fast. Stem cells could indeed be turned into eggs. Artificial wombs could sustain life. But the human body, especially the male body, was not yet ready for such burdens. For Richard, it was proof
Oh.
that even billionaires could not by nature's rules without paying a price. What do you think? If technology advanced to the point where men could carry children safely, would it be a miracle of science or a dangerous tampering with nature's design?
I think a miracle of science. Yeah. I'm going to go with the miracle of science. Yeah. Wow. There was a billionaire suddenly develops a baby pump in his wife is pregnant by Deco's Toss. The link to the video will be the description below. Go and check them out and drop a like if you like. And comment them below if you want to see more reaction like this one. And subscribe if you're new and click the bell so you can be notified when I upload. Bye. Wow.